Why did smoking become a routine part of life from the time you woke up in the morning and all of the meals when you're at your workplace, in the evening, and then the evening events at the nightclub, and before and after human intimacy? How did a shredded leaf wrapped in paper become an essential part of daily life?
Easy it is to keep a man happy. Why not give your husband a carton of Philip Morris cigarettes?
The Flintstones has been brought to you by Winston.
I love football, and I love relaxing, because for me, relaxing always includes Skoal, the smokeless tobacco.
What's it like using Skoal Bandits? That's real easy. Skoal Bandits is tobacco in a neat little pouch.
Hey Divas, we are here in the heart of East London at the fabulous E1 Club. We're here for a very exclusive
first live review on the mental mocha upper deckies voice caffeine. I cut out carbs so I have a wicked
So I'm a professor at Stanford University School of Medicine. I am a surgeon, believe it or not, but I, about 20 years ago, developed a passionate research interest in how the tobacco industry recruits its users, its customers. And, it really began when my mother came down with lung cancer. The glamour of smoking, all of that was engineered by brilliant advertising and marketing by a group of people who grew and marketed tobacco products. It didn't happen organically. They were specifically targeting macho men in the army by putting cigarettes in the packs that they used in World War I in the trenches, by targeting women or the suffragette movement, and then later in the 1970s and beyond, women's liberation. They coacted all of the popular things in culture, music, art, books, you name it. The tobacco industry, sports, movies, everything, movie stars, sports stars, became part of an octopus of marketing around the American population, which made, by the end of the 20th century, most adults smoked through the 1950s and 60s. And frankly, if you didn't smoke, there was something wrong with you and you didn't belong. One of the things I noticed when I was in training as a young physician, all the nurses smoked. Every time they had a break, they went and smoked. And I looked into that and I wondered, there have been studies. And the studies were that it was built into nursing school that whenever there was a break, you smoked. And if you didn't adopt the smoking habit of your fellow students, you were somehow other and didn't belong. And so it was very common that nurses picked up the smoking habit. Fortunately, much less so today than it was in that time. But it was all about social acceptance.
How has things sort of changed from what and what happened in the 50s and 60s versus what's happening today?
Important changes, but fundamentally, they're doing the same damn thing. They are targeting young people. Why? Because how many 40-year-olds wake up in the morning and say, hey, I think I'll start smoking today? Almost all tobacco use, almost all nicotine addiction begins as part of adolescent rebellion from about 11 or 12 to about 18 or 19. Not many adults pick up the smoking habit, and the industry knows this. And so they have to make smoking cool. They have to make that teenager who is standing on the sidewalk like this after school, not cool, but a dumb chump who bought the big lie, right? That's the key thing we as public health advocates need to help educate young people about. But the industry is a wolf in sheep's clothing. In the 1940s and 50s, they showed more doctors smoke Camels than any other brand. Well, they had all sorts of things, which of course you would say, you can't make health claims, but they do today. They just do it more subtly, but just as effectively by showing healthy young models in their 20s on bicycles, backpacking, jumping on trampolines, God knows what. All these activities and sports, associating their product with sports, as though it's a vigorous, youthful lifestyle. And you might say, well, okay, they're not showing as they did in the 1950s and 60s, showing actual teenagers in ads. They're showing young people in their 20s. But you know, the advertising professionals know that to teenagers, what's most influential is to see what young adults do, because they're going through a terrible, tumultuous time of life. And when they see these confident, fashionable, elegant, handsome, beautiful 20-somethings, it absolutely attracts them to the products that these older kids, or young adults in this case, are using. And that's the formula the industry uses to attract young teenagers. Of course, today, it's not just about cigarettes. And today, because the market is moving away from cigarettes, especially amongst youth, what they're selling is addiction. And they're coming out with a whole set of emerging products. So years ago, it was all cigarettes. And still today, by the way, most of their profit is from cigarettes. But they want to get young people hooked, so that they're coming out with e-cigarettes, with these oral pouches, which I'm sure we'll talk about, like Zyn, which is going viral in America, and also heated tobacco, which actually smolders the tobacco rather than burns it, but it still has products of combustion that are dangerous. But anything that gets a teenager nicotine addicted is good for the industry, because addiction is a splendid business model. Once you start buying it, you're compelled to buy it. Why? Not because it makes you feel better, but because if you don't take it, you feel absolutely awful. It's withdrawal. And so it's a great business model, and they want to get people hooked, and they want to get people buying their product over and over and over for decades.
And a lot of what you're talking about comes from research that you've done with an organization called STRITA. Is that right?
Yes. STRITA is simply an acronym for Stanford Research into the Impact of Tobacco Advertising. And I founded that some 20 years ago. And what I found as an academic is, when I looked at the drivers of the success of cigarettes amongst the American population, I realized that there was genius marketing. And it was the beginning of eBay, when people were selling old magazines and they were extracting ads from old magazines. So I said, look, when I looked online in those days, there was very little examples of what the industry had done in its advertising campaigns. So I set about, over the last 20 years, to collect a vast amount of tobacco advertising material, put high quality scans online, and to analyze them with annotations, when they occurred, which company, what the theme was, how they relate. Because often you'd see one ad in a Time magazine or Look or Life, and you wouldn't realize it's part of a campaign. And it's a campaign in newspapers, and it's in magazines, but also on television and radio. And we have many of those videos and audio ads as well. So we put those out so they could be used by advocates for public health, such as you, Mitchell, and also for Congress and regulators and legislators, to show the evidence of what the industry is doing. Now, after creating a huge database online at tobacco.stanford.edu, we decided to look right at the edge of what's happening today. And so our research for the last 10 or more years has been the bleeding edge of what the industry is doing those months, those weeks, even those days. Now, what's happened is that the traditional way tobacco industry marketed, magazines, newspapers, TV, and radio, has gone way down. Now, where are they marketing? Well, first of all, you have to know, in 1970, the US government banned cigarette advertisements from TV and radio. Why? Because it was mass media. Well, what's mass media today? Especially if you're a teenager. Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, right?
Yeah, not TV and radio.
Or X. And so what's happened is that the industry has gone onto social media hugely. And because the main social media platforms like Meta, which is Facebook and Instagram, they don't allow paid tobacco ads, but they do allow them to do organic channels, which they do. And so what happens is, they go out there and they put their advertisements for free. It doesn't cost them anything. TV ads and radio ads were hugely expensive. Billboards were hugely expensive, right? But these are free. They just have to have some creative person put together a clever campaign, and you put it up. And of course, not many people are interested in looking at the channel of Marlboro or the channel of Zyn. However, they very cleverly, every ad they put up has hashtags. Those hashtags enormously amplify the reach, the number of impressions, the number of eyeballs seeing it. So for example, we have a big study coming out on how Zyn has been marketed and how it became viral amongst American youth. And what we found is that the company's own, Philip Morris International owns Zyn brand, bought it from Swedish Match a couple of years ago, that they post regularly advertisements to Zyn_USA. Very few people see it, but they put it to hashtag Zyn. Hundreds of millions of people a week see it because it's blended together with the place that young people have begun to congregate. Just like Juul. Juul pioneered this. Beginning in 2015, it created what was called viral marketing. And by using social media, it created a fascination amongst American teens for the brand. It became the it thing, the thing to do. How did they do it? Influencers, giving away freebies at events, but social media that was very youth-oriented, saying, this is the latest thing. It's high tech. Young people love it. It's fashionable. It doesn't look like a smoking thing. It looks like a USB flash drive. So you can use it in your classroom. You can put it on your bedside and parents won't know what it is. They think it's a USB drive, right? And they were very, very smart. And it went viral. And eventually what happens? In 2018, Juul stopped social media advertising, period, because they were under withering scrutiny by the government, okay? Right. And when they did that, it didn't matter because they'd already recruited millions of teenagers posting to hashtag Zyn, in this case, hashtag Juul, and that there was huge activity, and the activity still was thousands upon thousands, even millions of eyeballs seeing young people saying what a great thing Juul was. And we're seeing this with Zyn today. What these companies are doing is recruiting teenagers to become members of their marketing department. And so most teenagers look at an advertisement and think, like we all do, oh, ads don't affect me. Well, they do affect you. However, the most potent way to influence a teen is for another teen to say this thing is great, you know? And that's what they did. And they went after influencers. They went after what the Zyn marketing, the Juul marketing was, cool kids. Why do I keep substituting Zyn for Juul? Because my brain is on Zyn now, but Zyn is following the same pathway of viral uptake, more and more and more. Whew. You know, something on the order of 450 million Zyn cans are sold in the United States in 2024. That's the company's own estimate. That's like a can and a half per person in the United States. And amongst young people, we're seeing youth and young adults using them a great deal. There's almost 500,000 middle and high school students, according to the National Youth Tobacco Survey, which is data mostly from last year rather than this year, and that it's just going up hugely. And young adults, I can tell you on the Stanford campus, they can't keep Zyn in the stores around the Stanford campus because the undergraduates are coming out and getting them by the fistful and buying it online in large amounts and selling it on to their friends. So it really is following a trajectory very much like Juul.
As you were talking, I was sort of thinking about the typical advertiser. If you don't sell an addictive product, then the cost to advertise to someone or the cost of acquisition to acquire a customer usually is far greater than the cost of the product. And so advertising wide scale doesn't necessarily make sense. But if you're selling an addictive product, something that someone's going to get hooked on and continue to buy for years and years and years, then it seems like it makes much more sense to run these social media campaigns and put a lot of money and effort into those things.
Yeah. Well, look, when it comes to the flagship cigarettes like Marlboro and Camel and those kinds of things. They have a long-term track record and it's well established in the marketplace. But things like Zyn pouches, and we should talk what these are.
Yeah, what are Zyn?
They're getting return on investment, which the investment is minuscule because they don't have to pay for the channel. They don't have to pay TV and radio. They're actually doing it for free on social media. It's unbelievable. It's such a killing for them. And the amplification is huge. Now, what is Zyn? Well, there's been oral tobacco long before there were cigarettes or even cigars. I mean, it was very commonly the leaves were chewed. And there's been chewing tobacco that's been popular amongst cowboys in the West and very much associated with rodeo, almost all men, and it was chewing tobacco. Well, it turns out about 100 years ago in Sweden, they produced a product called snus, S-N-U-S, which is a pouch wrapped in paper with ground up tobacco leaves in it. And the idea is you insert it between your upper lip and gums, and it gradually absorbs nicotine through the lining of your mouth. Now, these snus, even with tobacco in them, really are not as dangerous as inhaling smoke into your lungs. They will provide nicotine, but it's not quite the same way as smoking because the lungs have this huge surface area, like the size of a football field. So when you draw in either an e-cigarette with high nicotine or a cigarette, it absorbs very quickly. There's a spike that goes to the brain. With these oral pouches, the absorption is much more gradual. It takes more like an hour to reach its peak in the bloodstream. But still, it can curtail the feelings of misery when you're nicotine addicted if you don't get your dose. So it's probably a lot safer to use a pouch up under the lip. Now, what's happened in the last handful of years is that a new pouch product has come out that instead of ground up leaves, it's actually a carrier substance, like a white powder, mostly cellulose, into which they've doped nicotine. So these, I don't like to call them white pouches because it almost might them sound pure and innocent. They still deliver nicotine to the bloodstream, but they don't have much in the way of tobacco leaves or stem. Most of them have tobacco-derived nicotine in them. These pouches alone, they're not perfectly healthy by any means. First of all, addiction is not wellness, right? Getting addicted to nicotine and feeling miserable if you don't get it, right? People say it's a great product. I feel so much better. Well, it's only because you got addicted and you'd feel awful if you stopped. I mean, it's a great business model for the company selling it over and over and over. But they can cause problems with teeth and your gums and things like that. And you become addicted. And we know that nicotine addiction in teen years primes the brain of the adolescent to subsequent addiction. If you interview heroin or cocaine addicts or fentanyl addicts in their 30s, most of them will tell you that their very first addiction was to tobacco products when they were teenagers. So there's a high correlation of tobacco use with, that's not to say every kid that smokes or, most kids try out things like this. I'm talking about people who really get hooked and are doing a pack a day or 2 packs a day. They are more likely to explore other things. Similarly, if a teenager today gets hooked on nicotine using an e-cigarette or using a pouch or a nicotine chewing gum or a nicotine lozenge, they tend to explore other more dangerous forms of nicotine going forward. So that a certain number of kids who begin with an e-cigarette or with a pouch will go on to become smokers. And that's, of course, we know smoking is very deadly. Now, let's talk for a minute about e-cigarettes, okay? So as a physician, I would never want to take any medicine by inhalation of a cloud of mist or smoke unless it was specifically meant to treat the lung, like asthma or COPD, something like that. So it's a lousy way to do it because the lung is much different than the intestinal tract. The intestinal tract is used to getting all sorts of crap put into it and deals with it. The lungs are much more sensitive in that way. And so when you look at an e-cigarette, it's a mixture of propylene glycol, glycerin, nicotine, and flavorants. Flavoring chemicals. And there's this industry with thousands of chemicals that flavor our foods, right? I mean, I hate to tell you, when you have butter popcorn, there is no butter in butter popcorn. It's something called diacetyl. And we know that workers in flavor plants that make diacetyl compounds, it's a very dangerous place. They have to wear a breathing mask because if they don't, that stuff gets in their lungs and causes horrible lung disease. It will stenose your airways, narrow your airways, your small airways. So here's the problem. Yes, there is not the same cancer-causing chemicals in what they call vapor, right? The aerosol from the e-cigarette. There's not the same cancer-causing chemicals as in smoke. There's a whole other set of chemicals that are formed. What you might realize is that if you start smoking cigarettes when you're 15, you don't get lung cancer till you're 40, 50, or 60. It takes decades. So what happens in the lungs of the smoker is the lungs become inflamed and chronically inflamed, like a simmering pot. When you take e-cigarettes, we know that it causes inflammation in the lungs. Because it causes inflammation in the lungs on a chronic basis, we really don't know what's going to happen 30 or 40, 50 years from now, whether there's going to be a big upswing in lung cancer or chronic lung disease. So it is better not to be inhaling in these things to begin with. We have reasons to think if you're a 2-pack-a-day smoker, which we know to be deadly, and if you can switch over to vaping, right, to taking your nicotine in that way, it is probably a good thing for your health compared with smoking deadly cigarettes. On the other hand, what a lot of smokers do is they smoke in places they can, and they vape in places where smoking is prohibited. And so we know, for example, that if a smoker goes to the airport, can't smoke in an airport, you can't smoke on the plane, you can't smoke waiting for the baggage, there's a long period of time where you're not getting your nicotine. That helps smokers to imagine a world where they don't have to smoke all the time. And so discontinuities of nicotine dose help people to quit. Well, what happens if instead you fill in those blanks using vaping or nicotine pouches? It actually, that using together cigarettes and these other forms of nicotine deepens addiction and makes smoking cessation less probable. The industry knows this, and the industry is selling these things, so your cigarettes won't get lonely. One of the ads, right?
Wow.
They're not saying use these to quit, right?
Right.
Although there are some people who've used e-cigarettes to quit smoking and some who've used pouches and things like that to quit smoking, a disturbing number of smokers deepen their addiction and can't get off of it even more so because they never have a low nicotine level throughout the day because they fill it in when they're at their workspace.
Yeah. And this is a big problem. What are your thoughts about how to address something like this? I know, so there's lots of physicians, lots of public health officials out there who do talk about how the harm reduction tool an e-cigarette could be. And there are some people out there who have quit smoking with it. I don't have good data on this, but my sort of hypothesis about this is that far fewer people are quitting tobacco smoking with e-cigarettes than the number of youth, the number of the general public getting addicted to nicotine pouches, to e-cigarettes, who were never smoking in the first place. And so as a public health official, I'm worried about how we message this and how we talk about harm reduction if this is going to lead to a whole new generation of addiction. What are your thoughts about this? How should we be talking about it?
Mitchell, you've nailed it. Exactly. Look, as a public health advocate, which we both are, okay? And frankly, every parent and every teen should be an advocate for their well-being, is that the protecting young people from getting nicotine addicted to begin with is the single most effective way of reducing smoking in the population at large. Because if you never started when you're a teen, you're not going to start when you get older, right? So as a public health advocate, policies to keep these products from being especially appealing to young people is front and center. I'm a physician. I care deeply about smoking addicted adults. In fact, I was on a radio show some years ago, and a smoker called in and said, "Dr. Jackler, why do you hate smokers?" I said, "Are you kidding me? I care deeply for smokers. It's the tobacco industry that hates you. They want to kill you to make money from you, for God's sakes." So what I would say is this. These can be tools, and they're perhaps a bit better than the conventional tools that are used to help people smoke. They're not a miracle thing. Even people highly committed to quitting using support groups and psychotherapy may succeed in 6 or 8%. And maybe if they're using traditional methods like nicotine replacement gums and patches on the skin that give them nicotine. With the e-cigarettes, it may be like 12%. It may be a little bit more, but an awful lot are perpetuated. But we have to, first and foremost, make these products unappealing to kids. And that begins with flavors. Now, when you go into a supermarket and you go to the cereal aisle, right? Where are the sweet and fruity ones? They're down at knee level where the kids see them, right? Mom, get me Cocoa Krispies. So it is true there are some adult smokers who say, I like the taste of cotton candy vape. That may be true, but they are a strong differential appeal to young people who have sweet teeth, and they like sweet and fruity flavored things and minty flavored things. So there is no business. E-cigarettes, heated tobacco, well, cigarettes, they stopped all sweet and fruity flavors from cigarettes some 20 years ago. Based on the fact that there were problems with kids picking them up. And the industry began putting out pina colada cigarettes and chocolate flavored cigarettes in the early 2000s as a direct play to lure in teenagers. And the Congress in its wisdom came in, I think in 2010, and said, no more of that. The only thing you can have is menthol, which is minty flavor. And the kids mostly begin with menthol cigarettes because they're minty. The mint not only tastes better, it doesn't taste as yucky as tobacco does, and it helps to numb the throat a little bit and take away some of the coughing and irritation of the smoke. Well, the government in America is trying to get rid of menthol, and the FDA very much wants to get rid of menthol, and that's a whole other topic we could talk about. But let's talk about protecting kids. So first of all, kids don't like tobacco flavor, whereas adult smokers are used to tobacco flavor. So all of these products should be only in unsweetened tobacco flavor. Why do I say that? Because if you say tobacco flavor, pretty soon you're going to have tobacco and rum and tobacco and chocolate and tobacco and honey. It's going to be unsweetened, unadulterated tobacco flavor. Adults can use it. Kids have no interest in it. Okay? Flavor, first and foremost. 2, these things shouldn't be high-tech and designed. A lot of the big e-cigarette tanks today have games on the outside. Right? I mean, give me a break, okay? Shouldn't have that. The next thing is the amount of nicotine and the concentration of nicotine. Around the European Union, and many other countries, European Union, UK, Israel, no more than 2% nicotine in these things. However, in America, there's no limit. And so we end up with 5, 6, even 7% nicotine in the product. Highly, highly addictive. And that's a big problem. The second thing is plummeting price. So a Juul pod, delivered, that little pod, 0.7 cc's of liquid, delivered the same number of puffs, 200 puffs, as a pack of 20 cigarettes, about 10 puffs per cigarette. And the same absorption, because it had very potent nicotine, which almost all of them do today. So the same absorption as a puff of cigarette, okay? But it was less expensive. But what's happened today, you get these big tank things. Number one in America is Elf Bar. Elf Bar comes in 5,000, 10,000, and many others up to 20 or 30 or even 50,000 puffs. Huge tanks of nicotine liquid. Nicotine's dirt cheap to these manufacturers. But what that means is, if you take this, a 30,000 puff tank, which costs $15.99, that's the equivalent of 15 cartons of 10 each. So 3,000 cigarettes. I mean, and it's cheap. So if you want to go out and buy a pack of Marlboros or Camels, it's like $8. If you buy American Spirit, it might be 12 or 15 bucks, right? That's another whole story. But suffice it to say, it is very important that there be a tax on nicotine. The attack on the amount of nicotine. Because nicotine is the key thing in all of these. If you take nicotine out of cigarettes, people stop using them by and large, right? Kids who are vaping want to vape because they look cool and they're blowing out clouds. And their friends are all doing it, but they don't really want the nicotine. So I think if you had a high cost of taxation on the nicotine, the higher the concentration, the more nicotine in aggregate that's in it, the price gets higher and higher and higher. So kids are not going to be drawn to high nicotine products because they're too expensive. We know the teenagers have limited discretionary income. I mean,
Right.
they want to get their, their Apple Music. They want to go to the movies. They want to buy ice cream. And you know what? If your money's going to Zyn and to Juul and to Elf Bar, once you get hooked, you don't have free choice. A big part of your allowance and your earnings from working at McDonald's or whatever, are going to go into buying nicotine products because you don't have a choice.
Right.
This is not about freedom to choose.
Right.
You lose that freedom once you get hooked. You're in handcuffs and you're cuffed to these companies.
Yeah.
Are trying to get you cuffed to them in that way. So again, to reiterate, no sweetened, fruity, youth appealing flavors, limit the amount of nicotine, price it according to the nicotine level so that kids are driven away from the highest amount. Because I know teens are always going to experiment. That's what I did. That's what you probably did. I mean, think about it, like in high school, we went out a few times and got drunk and probably, felt miserable by it. But that didn't make us lifetime alcoholics. But if you go out on Saturday night and have a bunch of vaping and you vape to look cool, and by the way, starting smoking isn't easy. It tastes bad. It burns. If you get through 2 cigarettes, you're probably, hunched over the porcelain throne, tossing your cookies, right? Whereas these vaping things have just as much nicotine potency, but it's delicious. It tastes like cookies or chocolate, and it's much softer than tobacco smoke. So they're more potently addictive. They get people. So that's why it's so important that these devices not be appealing to kids and that they not be flavors appealing to kids, and that the prices through taxation go up based upon the amount of nicotine in them. The kids may try at a party something because it's cheap and low nicotine. And frankly, if you're with a group, nobody knows how much nicotine is in what you're doing.
Right.
Right. You and I did some binge drinking in high school, but we grew out of it. The same thing if you're, using it occasionally at a party and then later stop, you aren't left with that lifetime legacy and something that's going to ruin your health, shorten your life. And oh, by the way, the amount of deaths everyone talks about, which is like 3 fully loaded jumbo jets crashing every day because of nicotine addiction, tobacco use. On the other hand, there's a vastly greater, I'll tell you as a physician, if you think of the pyramid, the deaths are right at the top. But there's a huge number of people who, when they get older, suffer every day of their life. They're short of breath, they have heart disease, they have peripheral vascular disease. They want to chase around their grandkids and they're just out of breath. I mean, it just saps you of your well-being and vigor, having smoked for many years. It's a terrible thing. And, the industry says it's freedom of choice. You should be able to choose your own vices. I don't disagree with that in a way, but the industry and the users need to pay the full price of it. Right. I mean, those of us who are non-smokers spend a ton of money in taxes paying for the care of people and the lost wages and the early retirements because you can't continue to work. So this is, you asked me earlier, what they were doing in the 20th century that was so obvious with doctors and nurses and dentists smoking and stuff like that. They're doing the same damn thing. If you look at what they're doing today, you look what Zyn is doing today. I have a big analysis of how Zyn became viral amongst US adolescents and young adults, coming out with the World Health Organization, be coming out in the next couple of months. It shows how they use the playbook of 20th century tobacco advertising to a T. They just copied it. Why reinvent the wheel? It was incredibly effective. It's all about return on investment. It's all about what works. They wouldn't be advertising that way if they didn't think it would sell the product. And it sells the product. And their advertising budgets are small because they're getting in mass media on the cheap. That needs to change. I would hold the social media companies to account. There's no way they should be allowing tobacco industry to advertise their products on Facebook, on Twitter, Instagram. And what happens is the work of the tobacco industry stimulates a vast community of young people to post memes, humorous things about it. Zyn is a combination of sin and zen. And if you look at Zyn ads, the number one type of Zyn ad is find your Zyn. Zyn, the name of the company brand. What they're saying is, find your Zen. And all their ads show as though Zyn was a drug like alcohol, marijuana, or Valium. It'll calm you down. It doesn't calm you down at all. That's not what okay. It may calm you down if you're deeply addicted and would feel awful if you didn't get it.
Sure.
It's a total misrepresentation. It suggests a drug-like effect. It shows, many of their ads show people in a hammock taking Zyn, right? By a beach. But over and over, they say this is for your relaxation. I mean, literally.
Yeah.
Relaxation. And it just over and over, find your Zyn. And not just still images, but videos. You can go on our website, tobacco.stanford.edu, go to Nicotine Pouches, and you'll see many different brands. But Zyn is by far number one amongst youth in America, and rising very, very rapidly over the last few years.
Have you looked at other research with like social media influencers? So, I'm still a young guy. I'm 26, and a lot of my social media, the things that I look at, has to do with guys my own age. And unfortunately, a lot of them are using these products on their channel. I don't know if they're being paid to promote this or not, but they are promoting these products. And so we're seeing a lot of young influencers, a lot of people with a lot of social power or social influence using these, and also pushing these products further and further, hitting the virality. Have you looked at those types of things?
Very much so. Spend a lot of time on what are called social media analytics. What we found, first of all, is that there's a long history of the tobacco industry using celebrities. Now, in the 20th century, they would have movie stars like Sinatra. They would have singers, famous singers, Nat King Cole. They would have baseball players, Willie Mays, who I actually got to know pretty well. And Willie Mays, was in 2 different tobacco ads in the 1960s. And I asked him, he said, I remember that. I said, were you a smoker? He was charming. He's from a rural Alabama. And he said to me, he says, I couldn't smoke. If I did, my dad would have whooped me. He never even smoked, but he was in all these ads. And that was very common.
Yeah.
Now, fast forward now. Celebrities are social media influencers. Many tobacco companies, and it's well documented, use influencers. We see in the nicotine pouch world, and there are many other companies such as Velo, V-E-L-O, which is very popular in Europe and somewhat popular in the United States, uses influencers all over the place, paid compensated influencers, whether it's money or free product or tickets to some event, they are compensated to say nice things. With Zyn, infamously Tucker Carlson, went online, and you can see, tens if not hundreds of millions of views to Tucker Carlson with the helicopter bringing in a huge Zyn can. Although he claims he never accepted anything from the company, and the company claims that, is never part of it. And just we learned a week or so ago, Tucker Carlson now doesn't like Zyn. He's created his own nicotine pouch. There's no honor amongst thieves.
Yeah.
But there is much examples in e-cigarettes, nicotine pouches, and even in cigarettes of the industry soliciting trendsetters, young people, whether they are in the music or art world, whether they're fashionistas, whether they're simply social media stars because of what they do, and they end up praising the product in their feed. And they may have, they say the mega influencers, more than 1 million, there's a whole chain of them going down. There are influencer companies out there where people with lots of followers on social media sign up in those companies. And those companies recruit companies. So many brands use influencers, but the tobacco industry has no business doing this. None whatsoever. It really doesn't. And it does it, and it permeates. These companies like Philip Morris International, which makes Zyn, and also Marlboro, the #1 cigarette worldwide. British American Tobacco makes Velo and Camel, these huge conglomerates. Those are responsible corporations, quote unquote, right? And what they do around the world compared within the United States is remarkable. So in the United States, they do terrible things. But when you go to Kazakhstan or Indonesia, right, or Macedonia, they have no boundaries, even though it's American capital or British capital for many of these things. And they claim to be reformed industries. So all of this, when you use the term, Mitchell, harm reduction, my antenna always go up with that, because that's the narrative of the company. We are change. We're part of the solution today, not part of the problem. We want to help people by offering them alternatives and reducing harm, when in fact they're looking to retain their addicted customers and to create new addicted customers. That's what it's all about, right? I hate to be very cynical, but this is a really evil industry. And so while there are, I'm not dead set opposed to heavy smokers switching to something else, the industry is using it to create new smokers, to create new addicts, if you will. So these industries need to be roped in. I should say, Mitchell, if you want to go to a group of high school kids and middle school kids, and you want to help them to understand about what the tobacco industry is doing, so there's 3 ways you can do it. When the tobacco industry is forced by government action to do education, they come out and their primary message is, smoking is an adult habit. You're too young and won't be permitted to do it. Well, what do you think? I mean, that's exactly what kids want to do. They want to do things forbidden to them by adults, right? The second thing, which you and I both know, we're generations apart, but they show you the black lungs and they say you'll get sick and you may die young. Teens are immortal. They have no view towards that. By and large, most teens just don't care about things like that.
Sure.
What the third way, and this is the way that actually works, you show teenagers that when they see this kid smoking after school, looking cool, he bought the big lie. And he's a chump, like a marionette on a string by this industry that wants to take the money out of his pocket and do it for the rest of his shortened life. And so what you show them is the way in which they manipulate and lie. So, teenagers, and when I was a teenager, I'm sure I lied a lot. Teenagers sometimes lie. They hate to be lied to.
Yeah.
Incredible antennas for people lying to them. And when you show them how the industry lies and goes out of their way to manipulate them and how that happened, they get really angry. And you know what? Remember the old Peanuts movies? When the adults spoke, it was wah, 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 wah. You don't even hear them. Teenagers want to hear it from other teenagers. So what we want to do is to tell the truth about the industry and show them. And nothing's more impactful than showing them advertising videos and advertising images and have them go, oh my God, look what they're doing. What do you think? So, well, I will show an ad from today and I'll say, what do you see? And then we'll start peeling the onion. And my God, what are they doing? They're trying to get inside my brain and engineer me into becoming an addict using their product. And teens get angry and they share that anger on social media and to their friend network with others and say, don't be a chump, right? These guys are a bunch of guys trying to make money off you and trying to wreck your health when they do it. And so, that technique of showing them the manipulation, the lies by the industry and what they're really doing and unmasking the companies behind it, and how they're the messaging and how their messaging can sound so good. Oh, harm reduction. I mean, they're even buying medical companies to become healthcare companies, right? You can see that. And they have a whole propaganda campaign to try to take their tarnished public image and make it an image of a noble company doing good, environmentally friendly. There's a lot of greenwashing in tobacco. Making tobacco brands like Marlboro look eco-friendly. When you think about it, what's more polluting than breathing deadly smoke directly in your lungs over and over all day long? It's the most intense. And oh, by the way, what goes on the ground, right? Are the butts. And, the e-cigarettes are filled with e-waste and plastic and things like that. So greenwashing is a big part.
I wanted to ask you about, so you talked about the rise of Zyn. Millions of Americans, of young youth, are getting addicted to this. I wanted to see your thoughts about the tobacco industry. I wonder if they are concerned at all that they may become something like Juul, where they have this big rise, and then there's heavy regulation, heavy government step in, and now they're sort of banned from selling this product or selling it in a lesser way. Do you think they're concerned about that at all? Or it's more of like, well, we've got our customers, now we're good for the next 40 years or whatever it is? Or do you think that's more like they're trying to do a controlled rise of like a virus? Like let's market this product, but not so fast, so we don't get, stopped by the FDA or the government or anything like that. Do you think tobacco companies care about any of that?
No. Here's the deal. The tobacco industry has always, throughout its history, escaped from the intent of well-meaning regulations and legislations seeking to rein in its excesses. So part of what we do at STRITA is we do opposition research. Okay, if I was a tobacco company, what would I do next, right? And there are all sorts of levers. For example, laws were written that a tobacco product came from a tobacco plant, its leaves, roots, or stems. They came out with nicotine synthesized from other chemicals and said, these e-cigarettes have synthetic nicotine. You can't touch us. Well, I will give credit to the U.S. Congress, because the U.S. Congress a couple of years ago designated all forms of nicotine, whether synthetic or coming from the tobacco plant, to be tobacco under the FDA regulatory sphere. But now what happens? Now companies are coming out with non-nicotine nicotine analogs, slightly chemically different from nicotine, but just as addictive.
Yeah.
And now nicotine analogs are. One thing to realize is that federal regulation is very slow for two reasons. One, the process is very cumbersome with lengthy periods of public comment. They can then, the day before it's supposed to hit, they sue. It goes up through multiple levels of court, and they can do things for years by just stretching out. Whereas the company can innovate like that around it. And they have the very best people that money can buy, the very best people, the lawyers, the engineers, the product designers. They are very, very clever in that way. So you have to realize when it comes to reining in the tobacco industry, it begins in your city and your county. Why? Because the industry can't fight the battle everywhere. It gives tons of money to congressmen. That's not a good thing. John Boehner, who was the Speaker of the House, gave out tobacco money on the, is now on the well of the House. He is now on the board of a major tobacco company after he left Congress, right? What we're finding is, however, that we as parents and teachers in schools can go to our local aldermen or supervisors in our city and say, no more selling flavored tobacco products. Hundreds, in fact, probably more than 1,000 US cities from the bottom up, and even 2 states, Massachusetts and California, have categorically banned flavored tobacco products, right? Can't get them in California. What happens? So a lot of people smoke menthol, especially African Americans. And what did the industry do? I'll give you another example, right? The day that the ban on menthol cigarettes in California came out, the next day they introduced non-menthol, wink, wink, menthols. Now, menthol does 2 things. It tastes minty, and it gives you a cool feeling in the throat, like Vicks Vapor Rub. But it doesn't really cool your throat. It just biologically triggers a trip channel, which makes it feel cool. So what did they do? They took cooling agents called Wilkerson sword cooling compounds and put them in tobacco. And so that when you use it, it doesn't have the minty flavor, but it has a cooling feeling. And cooling feeling is part of taste. It's part of flavor. And so they were all ready to go with the next escape from regulation the day that happened, right? So now California is trying to take that away, right? But so I would say it begins in your cities. It begins in the counties. Now, in America, it's very hard to regulate advertising because of the First Amendment. In its wisdom, the Supreme Court has indicated that corporations are like people when it comes to freedom of speech and government ability to rein them in. Now, there are things the FDA can do, and there are settlements like the Master Settlement Agreement of 1998 that reined in advertising quite a bit, largely by agreement with the industry. But government has full power over the design and the features of the products, the flavors, the nicotine content, the design of them. They can ban them. Cities, states can do this. Counties can do this. So work locally with your schools, with parent groups, the PTA, and, get on the doorstep, of these folks. They will get, attempts to be corrupted by the industry. But generally speaking, right now in the East and West Coast particularly, you can go online, actually. Tobacco Free Kids is a wonderful organization. They actually have a list of all the cities that have banned flavored tobacco products and then taxation is very important. So taxation is federal, but it's also state.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what the industry does when a city in Oregon tries to change something is they will go to the Oregon State House and they will pay a bunch of campaign contributions to the legislators in Salem, right? Is the capital in Oregon.
That's right. Yeah.
And they will, and then they will put in a law with state preemption, where the law is passed by the state of Oregon, and it says this law preempts any law in a city or county. And that's the industry strategy of state preemption. The industry has enormous political power because it's money talks and BS walks. On that happy note.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate your time. I usually like to end on the one last question, which is, what do you enjoy most about being a physician, or what do you enjoy most about being a public health advocate?
You know, as a physician, there is but one preventable cause of serious disease and of premature death, and that is tobacco use. And if I can make even a little bit of difference in reining in this industry and cutting off its tentacles that are seeking to get the youth of America, the Black Americans, Latino Americans, LGBTQ, women, all these different targets where they market, if I can reveal what they're doing to help persuade the judiciary and litigation, to help persuade regulators and legislators to see what the industry is doing and therefore put in effective regulation, legislation, and legal implications so that they won't be able to continue what they're doing. That's what I do every day when I get up and I start to look at what the industry is doing now. That's what drives me. I feel like I'm protecting my grandkids who are still very young from the predations of this industry.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Jackler. I really appreciate your time and being on today's podcast, Everyday Epidemics. We are so thrilled to have this conversation with you, and thank you for all the work that you do, because you play a very important role.
You know, those of you who are interested, come to our website, tobacco.stanford.edu. Take a look. Use those images in education. You can write me if you want some material, Jackler@stanford.edu. For those of you who are on the East Coast, Stanford is STANFORD, not STAM. That happens.
Thank you so much for joining us on the DC Smoke Free podcast, Everyday Epidemics. It really was such a great episode with Dr. Robert Jackler, so thank you again. If you could support our channel, so right now it's mainly if you could subscribe to our YouTube channel, that would be great. Again, follow us on Spotify or check out our social medias. We're slowly growing those out and posting more and more, so you can find us on Facebook at DCsmokeFree. You can find us on Instagram at DCsmokeFree. Pretty much any channel you can think of, we're at DCsmokeFree. So check us out there, leave us a like, comment. If you have questions, reach out to us there as well. We're actively monitoring those things and happy to answer any questions that you may have. So anyway, thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you next month.